back, everybody. If you heard the workshop on public funding yesterday, you're in the wrong place. This is public funding. So, I'm Jane. I am the Marketing and Publicity Manager for SCAPE. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers this afternoon on public funding. We have Steph Walker on my far right and Kate Montgomery. Steph is the General Manager of the Christchurch Arts Festival, and Kate is based in Wellington at Creative New Zealand, and she is the Senior Arts Advisor for Visual Arts. So I'll hand over to them. I look forward to hearing the talk. Thank you.
Usually short, well done. Kia ora koutou, everyone. Yesterday, what we did when we were going through some of the information that we've got to share, we sort of made some time at the end for questions. But what we thought we'd do today, because you've had the benefit of a number of different sessions that have probably got lots of ideas bouncing around in your minds, is that we'd welcome interruptions as we go along. So if anybody wants clarification as we go through, feel free to just throw your hand up or yell out, and we'll see if we can answer your questions straight off the bat. Where should we begin?
That's a good question. The first thing I wanted to say before we launch into public funding and I guess ways to get it is just, I guess, a disclaimer that this doesn't mean you need funding to do projects, and I think that's something really important to know, that you know, you shouldn't be sitting around going, oh, well, we can only do it if we've got a couple of grand or something like that. Sometimes you can do your best work when you've got such limitations on yourself. I have a background in performing arts, and one of the most successful shows I was involved in, we did at Bats Theatre in Wellington for the budget of $350, and it won theatre awards and all sorts of stuff like that. So what you can do with your creativity, your imagination, by begging, borrowing and stealing is quite an amazing thing, and through the cover of night and all of that. So please don't think that, funding's the be-all and end-all, and if I don't have funding, I can't make it as an artist and I can't make my work, because I think if you're here as an artist thinking that you need funding before you need to make work, then you're probably not an artist.
And on that joyful note, I think those points are really valid, and my background, I guess originally I was involved with the High Street project here in Christchurch, which doesn't exist in that form anymore, but it was an artist-run project space. And so, I mean, I certainly learnt a lot about how to look for funding that could catalyse a project through my involvement with High Street. Sometimes, you know, as Steph was saying, we could fundraise to cover certain kinds of costs, we could, you know, work with other people and to find in-kind support for projects. But sometimes what we did need was, you know, a solid little chunk of money, and sometimes it wasn't much, but it would mean that we could actually turn the volume up on the project, I guess. So I think this is where we're kind of coming from, and hopefully you have some thoughts about, you know, the kinds of things that you'd really like to see happen in Christchurch as a result of the conversations over the last kind of day or so. And what our information and our kind of tips, and I mean, I hate to say tricks, but, you know, getting used to the processes that you need to go through if you are looking to access some public funding, we can maybe just steer you in a few different directions, and that might be helpful in future.
So just to, I guess, define what public funding is and what we see public funding being, local government funding, central government funding, and we're also going to extend it a little bit to take public literally and talk about crowdfunding and things like that as well a little bit today. Just to set the scene, has anyone here had any public funding before in terms of local or central government? Almost?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's a really nice place to start from, is that sometimes when you look for this sort of support from organisations that might not be familiar with you personally or your practice, sometimes it does take an application and an introduction and a conversation to start them sort of getting in tune with why your project is valid, why it needs to happen now, and why this is a really important opportunity for you personally or professionally. So we're going to talk a little bit about track record as we go through. Track record is one of these kind of quote-unquote phrases, and it is really important that not only in terms of your own artist CV and some of the projects that you're involved with, but also some of the applications that you've kind of put forward. That all becomes what's known as a track record within the organisations that you talk with. Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about relationships and, you know, having those conversations, but if you start at an early phase, you will always have time to kind of build those relationships up.
Shall we start with local or central first, Kate?
Or let's go local.
Let's go local.
Creative communities?
Creative communities. Have you guys heard of creative communities before? Creative communities is a collaborative scheme, I guess, between all the local authorities in New Zealand and Creative New Zealand, who Kate works for. Basically, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but
Going good.
Creative New Zealand gives pots of money to each of the local authorities, and those local authorities have an advisor within the council who then doles out the funds, basically. And I think it happens twice a year.
Yeah, in terms of some of the closing dates, I'll find the right page and I'll call it out in a second. There are 2 closing dates, and my understanding is that the next one coming up that you might want to think about if you've had some good ideas is in August, and there's always a closing date again in February. So they roll around, and if you're thinking, we'll go through the kind of eligibility criteria and the kinds of things that creative communities can consider supporting in a second. But if you do have an idea for a project and you're not sure if it's going to fit with the criteria, always feel free to call up and speak to the advisor at the Christchurch City Council just to get some advice. And they can sometimes suggest other pathways or opportunities if it's not quite the right fit. So yeah, don't be too afraid to ever get in touch. The phone numbers and things are always available, so use them.
So page 17 of the helpful resource kit that you all would have received has got some information about creative communities. Basically, it's, as the name suggests, needs to be a creative project, but it also needs to engage in communities.
And so, you'll see just at the bottom, projects must meet at least one of the following funding criteria. So you have to at least tick one of these boxes. You may tick more than one, and that will only strengthen your application. So create opportunities for local communities to engage with and participate in arts activities, support diversity in the arts and cultural traditions, or enable and encourage young people under 18 to engage and actively participate in the art. Community? No, just the art.
Just the art. So that's actually quite a broad thing. If you think about the art that you create, thinking about visual art, thinking about the different communities that engage with it, that can be the communities that you engage with to maybe create the work. It might be the people who you market the work to tell them that it's happening, and then it's perhaps the geographical community that you put it in. Is that geographical? I don't even know if that's a thing, geographical community. But the place where you put it and the communities around that, and then the actual communities who are going to come and view the work and engage with the work. So immediately there, you've got a broad range of communities that you can consider when you're looking at a creative communities application.
What we might do, even just to kind of mix things up a little bit, maybe we should step through some of those funding questions on the Creative New Zealand application form.
Yes.
Just as a way to kind of structure sort of thinking about applications in any context. What I need to sort of do a little disclaimer on is the Creative New Zealand application form for general funding. It's a rather large document. There are some really important bits and pieces chunked through the document, which I'll just kind of point to quickly now. And you can just keep these core questions in mind as we then look at the online application process for creative communities. Because in terms of a kind of step-by-step building a track record, creative communities is a really good way to start kind of building a sense of trajectory in your career, of providing some projects that then become supporting material for future applications. You can always provide photographs of earlier work or prior projects, sort of success stories and things. So, yeah, we'll look at it.
So if you can all please turn to page 44.
Excellent.
of the resource kit.
So we had a really nice catch-up, Steph and I, the other day, and we sort of thought about some of the core things that would be really useful to sort of, let you have a window in on. And when we were talking about the kinds of questions that you need to consider as you kind of plan your own project as it evolves, and how you look to move it from a process of kind of planning or evolution or idea into a kind of proposal for others to consider. We talked about, how pithy your kind of contextual statement, your sort of description of the thing that you want to make sure can happen, needs to be. And Creative New Zealand has come up with the helpful suggestion that you should probably be able to say it in 500 words.
We reckon 300. We think they're being too nice. Well, I think that. You can't because you're CNZ. You probably think 500.
So I guess the kind of points that we wanted to kind of add to that, just in your thinking about how you can put forward a clear statement of purpose for your project. We had two things we came up with. One was the kind of elevator pitch idea, that if you were trying to talk someone into something and you only had the time and the elevator moving between floors to convince them that they really needed to get on board and support your project, you should probably be able to wrap it up and kind of put it forward in a really persuasive way in that kind of time period. Yeah. And the other test? The
other test is one that I have fine-tuned throughout my years at both BATS in Wellington and also at the Arts Festival, and it's called the DAD test. Basically, what we did, and I'll give the Arts Festival as an example, we got a lot of information coming from artists about their shows and about the work that we were presenting in the festival. And knowing that some of them, they were so entrenched in the work that what they were saying about their work was more about the process or the themes behind it and wasn't necessarily going to encourage people to come to the festival. So what we did is we took it and we rewrote it so that we thought anyone might be able to understand it. And then we sent it to our publicist, Dad, who's a builder, knows nothing about the arts. So we sent it to him and he was like, have a read of this, what do you think? And if he came back and said, I don't get it, then we'd rewrite it and we'd send it back to him so that we would get something that still remained true to the work and what the artist was trying to achieve, but also was something that anyone who perhaps doesn't have an insight into the visual arts, for example, or the processes around visual arts could get and could read and go, yeah, that sounds like a great project. I want to fund it, or I want to go and see it.
And I think something useful to say about this kind of DAD test idea is that the reason this is useful as a kind of concentration of your ideas is that the people that sit around the table to consider your application and to assess it in relation to the other applications that come in the same round may or may not have that background in the visual arts. You might have someone who's a, great sort of music person or advisor for the council. And so it does have to have that ability, at least in that pithy kind of purpose statement, that it can really cut through and that your point becomes the one that makes so much sense to them, they absolutely have to fund that project as well as some of the others.
Exactly. And I think it's also good to note that that's not... Some people think that dumbing down what you say about your work is selling out or is kind of giving up on being true to what you do as an artist. But I would say you should still be able to be very true to the process of what you do and how you do it, but still reaching as wide an audience with your work as possible. And a way to do that is to be able to explain very clearly and very simply what it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So it's a sales pitch for investment in some senses. Yeah. And the great thing is that in most applications you're able to supply supporting information. So if you still really feel that kind of conceptual basis still needs to carry with the application, you'll be able to supply that in a different format at a later stage. Yeah. Okay. So that's the what. Going to point 2. Again, the logistical kind of practical time frame related information is also really key and foundational to your explanation of your project. If you can't explain it clearly in terms of the step-by-step things that need to happen and show that a time frame exists to get all of those things done before whatever it is going to happen, then you're probably not going to fare as well as someone who can. So yeah, there's just a few useful kind of questions there on page 44 that you can keep in mind in terms of drafting something up. Again, this doesn't have to be, like magnum opus, ginormous kind of plan, but in terms of just making sure that you can kind of tick a few boxes and show how the dominoes will fall if the funding comes towards your project.
Yeah, so things to consider would be the timeline. How long is it going to take you to make the work? How long is it going to take you to install the work? Are you working with any other organisations or other people to create this work or install the work or anything else about the work? Have they agreed to do that? If they have, chuck in an email where you said, are you sweet to be involved in this? And they go, yeah, great, awesome. So that you can see that you do have collaborators involved and people are already engaging with the process. And think about if you're bringing anyone on to help you give critique on the work or something like that, mention their name and that they're happy to help and give that back up as well.
Yeah. So that is really about giving someone who's completely outside the project like a 360-degree view of what's going to happen. And also thinking about how you're going to reach out to the audiences, if you're going to be exhibiting some work or, who it is that you're trying to call forward from the community towards your work is really important because of those eligibility criteria.
So that should all be in your timeline as well, sort of a publicity marketing timeline should be within that. Yeah. Thinking about who you're going to work with kind of flows nicely to number 3, which is who, ko why. Who are the people that you're are involved in the process? It might just be you. So make sure that you have your bio in there, saying, what you've been up to, what you want to achieve, your background, any projects you've worked on in the past. And the same if you're collaborating with other people or other people within other organisations maybe. Have a brief bio on those as well so that you can see that someone's coming from a decent background, has a track record, I guess, or is from Christchurch, for example, would be something that creative communities may be looking for.
Yeah. As supporting information for, applications, sometimes references are great. I mean, you can always talk to the advisor, whether it's me in future, if you're interested in talking about Creative New Zealand funding generally, or the local arts advisor for the Christchurch City Council. We're available. You can ask us questions. So reading through documents, getting a sense of what might be required, and then going, would it be good if I supplied this? Do you think this would be helpful for the people assessing the application? It's a really good way to set up a bit of a rapport before you hand the thing in.
In fact, I probably encourage that. Do have those conversations so that they're aware of your name, that they're aware that you're submitting something into that funding round. And that you establish that rapport because they're going to see a lot of applications and it's really nice for them to know who it's coming from and know who's coming through as well.
Mm-hmm. And that you spoke passionately and were very engaged in the application
and
process.
Asked good questions.
That's right.
Yes.
The next bit is always the kind of slightly complex thing in most projects, the budget. And on page 53 of the booklet, there's a budget template, which I've found really helpful when I've been talking to people on the phone about applications of all kinds in the time that I've been with Creative New Zealand. And what it sets out is just a way that you can structure your own thinking. You don't have to necessarily use this format for Creative New Zealand applications, and the format that we'll look at in a minute for Creative Communities funding is slightly different, but the same basic rules apply. Within any project, there's going to potentially be some personnel costs, and an artist fee is kind of in this line, as well as paying for any assistance that you might need practically with the making of the work. If you need to have someone like maybe an electrician come in for a space that you're using, something like that can go in there. Production costs often relate to the materials that you're going to need to pay for purchase obtained somehow. That's where that line comes in. Admin and overhead costs could be relating to studio space, if you're lucky enough to have some, or different kinds of overheads or admin that you need to kind of have at your fingertips during the development of the project. And marketing costs are essentially about the promotion, making sure that you've thought about how best to share information with communities, bring people towards the work. So thinking through those kinds of building blocks and just kind of adding up the costs is one element. The revenue side of things, often for non-profit projects, might not have any, finances that are going to come as a result of presenting your project and having the community engaged with your work. But it is really interesting to consider using the bottom section of this table to illustrate some of the relationships that you've built in terms of sponsorship, in-kind support, personal investments. Most applications that come in for funding generally don't request 100% of the budget. So thinking about how you offset your request with other things that you can put in as resources for your project is really important.
Yeah, one example of that, if you're lucky enough to have studio space, say that you're using the university studio space, or I don't know, you're already paying for a studio anyway, and even if you don't do this project, you would still be doing that. You can put the estimated cost of what that studio would cost or does actually cost up in the expenditure, so in the costs, and then down in the project revenue you can put personal contribution or in-kind support from the university, and balance that out on the revenue side with putting that amount that you put up the top for studio space. And it's good to be able to see what support is coming for you in that respect, whether it's from an institution. It may be that you've got a mate who works somewhere with a colour copier and you're going to sneakily do some posters there, as has been known to be done. Or legitimately do colour posters there, and they've agreed that they will take those costs and do those for you. So that's another thing that you could put into in-kind support.
And I guess that also harks back to what Steph was saying about, if you've got an email from Sam saying, yeah, sure, come around on Thursday, we'll print off 30 posters, that's something that you can actually put in as evidence that when you say in-kind support, it's not just kind of like, I hope he's going to let you go on
fingers
Thursday.
crossed.
Yeah.
It's good to see if anything like that is confirmed, because obviously that suddenly makes your budget and your project look a lot more viable if you can say, Rosine's going to give me a whole crap load of paint. And here's the email from them saying that.
Yeah. Great. Cool. All right. Any questions? Pardon me? Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great question to ask in terms of if you need to buy a piece of equipment, whether it's looking at Chloe taking a photo of me, so I'm going to say like a camera. It is really important to know that these funding processes aren't about making capital costs available to the applicants. So if you yourself are going to be paying for something that you require for the project, that's a really great thing to put down in the revenue as well as the costs, because you're going to have to, use it for the project to be a success, and you're prepared to make that investment and have that available in future too. So thanks for that.
Anyone else? Got any questions?
It's fine.
It's okay.
Totally
they might have
fine.
had a question for us, I don't know.
Okay, where to?
So that's a brief look at, and basically any funding application that you need to do, they're going to ask you all of those questions. What is it? How are you going to do it? Who's involved? What's it going to cost? Those four things, no matter what funding application you do, they always pop up. So it's a really good exercise to go through those questions in your head and get that going.
Sure. And the other thing, the sneaky one, the missing one, is why. It's not on the application form. It's in your heart, in your head, because you've got this project that really needs to happen now for various reasons. And making sure that you carry that kind of passion and the integrity of why you're coming to ask for the support now is really important too. So we had a little bit of a chat about, covering letters and making sure that you kind of, in succinct ways, express the kind of, imperatives behind it. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is just another kind of, inside trick.
And consider the fact that when it goes to the people who are looking at whether or not they give you funding, that's something that they'll be asking themselves as well. Why should we give them money? Why is this project important? Is this a so what thing? Is it like oh yeah, I saw a piece of art today, so what? Or is it something that's actually important to fund? And that's something that you need to consider and try and communicate in your applications as well.
Yeah, totally.
So let's have a look at the Creative Communities application
Sounds good.
form.
What I didn't have for everyone yesterday, so we've totally polished this up nicely for you today, is there's this document that exists. Very helpfully, it's called a guide for applicants. It's got the purpose and much of the same information just in terms of what kind of projects you can perhaps put forward, what the funding criteria are, and different guidelines. This is directly available from this, the Creative Communities page on the Christchurch City Council website.
Best way to find it is just go in the search bar and put Creative Communities.
Christchurch.
Yep. Yes.
Bam. So feel free to, at your leisure, find this wonderful orange document and have a read through. But the Creative Communities funding process of application used to be a two-sided piece of paper. So slightly more refined version than the, I think it's about 19 pages for the
slightly simpler version.
But it's much the same kind of information that you'd ever be asked in terms of any application. So we'll just quickly scroll through. Name of the applicant. The thing to consider, and you'll see point 4, main contact person for the project. If you're doing something with a group of people, you might have to come up with kind of a name of the applicant that might be like a collective name, or maybe it's the name of the project that you're undertaking. The main contact person will obviously be exactly that, the person that's the first port of contact between the Christchurch City Council, following up once the project's run its course. So you need to make sure that the person that you jot down as number 4 is someone who will be able to answer the questions at the end of the funding process. So make sure it's someone kind of core and foundational. In most senses, that's always, pretty apparent who's the most appropriate person in that regard.
So that main contact person basically is liable for the report at the end, which is, it's an accountability report. And so that person needs to be able to say this, there were X many people that came to the exhibition, or we engaged with this many communities. And if you don't submit that report, it's kind of like a black mark against your name. So it is something really important to consider.
Yeah. Something in Christchurch, I think, well, actually anywhere, but is particularly sensible. If you do go through this process and you are lucky enough to be able to get some support, if there's any delays you encounter actually during the process of playing out the project, keep the arts advisor up to date, because it will mean that if you haven't yet realised your project and you're getting closer and closer and closer to the deadline when you're going to have to write a report about it, if they know, a month before that it's going to come in late, they can change the deadlines around and it won't be a problem. But if it is something that you leave until after that deadline, because it's a bureaucratic system, because there are reports and processes, overall, over the long term, that's kind of worth avoiding.
Section 2 is kind of the getting to the nuts and bolts of it, so the project details, saying which of the criteria you're applying under, so those 3 criteria we talked about. And then if it's targeted at a particular section of the community, it may be the broad community, it may be young people. You just need to make a decision on that. And then which of the following arts activities best describes your project? This can be quite a tricky one, I think. It may be that it quite easily fits under more than one. In which case, that'd be one of my questions to the arts advisor that you talk to, is this is the project, you rattle off your brief outline. I'm not quite sure whether it fits under interarts. What even is interarts? Is it craft/object art? I'm just not sure. And they'll be able to give you a guide as to where will be the most appropriate genre to put your project under.
Art form portfolio.
Art form, yes.
Very good. And then this is where, you give your project a name. It may not stay that for marketing purposes, but that'll be something that's tagged and kind of the consistent thing that's referred to in the funding process. So don't worry if it's just a working title. It's not a huge problem in terms of reporting at a later stage. Here's the description of the project. So this is your, perhaps not 500 word, but your kind of pithy elevator pitch that's required here. And then obviously just a really clear outline of this is why, essentially, like how will the project benefit your community? What is it that it's contributing? Is it, in the current environment, that it's going to be an exhibition that draws people together and allows people to spend time, with your work, thinking through its concerns, and also spend time with each other? There are lots of different ways that you could articulate what you believe the benefit will be. How is really just that, logistical, practical question. What are the timeframes? Where will it be? When is it going to happen? And then again, who's involved? Right, budget stuff. Okay.
I think the budget's actually quite simple on the Creative Communities one. After looking at the budget template that we talked through, rather than having to sort of spell out every single thing, which I think is important for you to know from a budget point of view anyway, you're breaking it down into fees, material, blah, 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 and the same on the project income side.
Yeah. And the slight difference between the two formats is just that here we expect that your costs will be everything it will completely cost. You'll show via using that box funds on hand, what some of those other investments will be. And the difference is expected to be the request that you're asking for support through Creative Communities. So budget templates often vary. I mean, the one that we looked at before is slightly different too. But if you just spend a little bit of time thinking through it, if you've got any questions, fire them to the advisor, and they're more than happy to rattle off the phrases that they get to use a few times to explain the same concept. So, yeah.
Then if there's any other funding you're applied for or received, which may relate to your budget that you've just tapped in, and any other grants you've previously received through Creative Communities. Yep. Don't worry if it's your first time applying and you haven't had any before, that actually, it's no biggie. Yep. Bank account number.
Give us the money.
Helpful to have one of those, you may have noticed. And a declaration, so T's and C's, all of that sort of stuff. Totally. And then you click submit and away you go.
Bam.
Obviously quite good to, this is kind of like a sucking eggs thing, but do it in Word first, make sure you've got it all right. And then no typos, no grammatical errors, that you've spelt the names of the people you're collaborating with properly, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's Creative Communities. Is there any questions, comments?
Any great ideas that you've kind of got bubbling away? I don't know, we'll save that for the drink afterwards.
Yeah. We don't really have time.
Yeah, we're kind of going blow by blow, practical. There are examples online by the Christchurch City Council website, and there are also on the, was being Creative New Zealand website, a number of kind of stories about who has received support either through Creative Communities or through general CNZ funding processes through this results of our work area. And this is actually a really lovely kind of infomercial I can do for all of those projects that you're going to go out and do in Christchurch. Because in future, if you feel really proud of what you were able to achieve, it's really great to then feed back some of the successful stories and some of your images and things to the advisor, because there are platforms within which, broadcasting a project after it's kind of been and gone is a really lovely way for other people to get a sense of what it is that you're making. And, a nice way to gain, additional publicity for future projects. Yeah, well, because I'm still relatively new at Creative New Zealand and I'm not the lead Creative Communities advisor, I would have to get back to you about that. But I believe that there is some information on the Christchurch City Council website, because every local authority has a slightly different amount of money according to however many people are actually within the region. So yeah, if you're interested for the Christchurch figures, actually just pop up afterwards and we'll go for a tour and have a look.
Yeah. So okay. That's local. That's local funding. So let's talk briefly about Creative New Zealand and what you can offer us, Kate.
Sure. Tell me what you want to do and let you know what I can do for you. Yeah, sorry,
that's exactly that.
This is a really interesting area that, of course, pertains completely to Christchurch. And this is a scheme, the Earthquake Emergency Assistance Grant Scheme. that obviously is trying as best it can to sort of free up some of the application processes around projects that need to be happening in Christchurch in order to make sure that lovely creative people like yourselves don't kind of up and, leave town, if you don't have to. So you'll see that there are kind of phases built in as a sort of strategy and a structure to this grant program. Obviously, you'll see from the dates up there that we are in phase 3. If you join the Creative New Zealand mailing list, you'll get the emails that come out, and at this stage, obviously, between now and December 2012, there's still quite a window of opportunity to perhaps have a conversation with me about a project that might fit in with the criteria for this grant scheme. It may also end up extending longer as a result of things that have changed since the grant scheme was established.
The cool things about the emergency assistant grant is that you don't have to fill in the giant application form that's in the resource kit.
There's also a rolling deadline, so month to month there's an application timeframe that you can talk to your advisor, which is me, about the project that you are passionate about, and we can go through a process of working out how it relates to the criteria for this support.
And you find out relatively quickly as well after you've applied whether you get the funding or not. So it's quite a nimble funding avenue, which is great. If you start looking at the Creative New Zealand Arts funding, which the giant application form is for, then you start to get into sort of 9 weeks, is it?
I think, it can
until you find out after the deadline whether or not you get the funding. And that's quite a while, especially if you want to do something that perhaps is really relevant to the now in Christchurch, and things are moving quickly or slowly depending on who you talk to. But if it's something that is really relevant and you really want to get it happening within the next few months, then the Earthquake Emergency Assistance Grant could actually be a really good way of doing it, because you're going to find out quickly.
Yeah. And again, if you've got a great idea, come and talk to me.
Yeah.
Because I'm based up in Wellington, avoid a toll call and just send me an email and we can work out a time, and we can do things that way too. So that's one option. There are certain kinds of projects that have already been funded through this, and I can, if it relates to a project that you've got in mind, we can go through that. But yeah, it's just a really nice kind of opportunity for you to think about how, a greater level, as they say in phase 3, greater level of activity can kind of come up through, evolve from the present circumstances, and what between now and the end of the year we might be able to kind of kickstart and get happening.
There are all sorts of other, there's like different levels of funding that Creative New Zealand can do. There's quick response grants, which are up to $7,500, and then there's the arts grants, or Te Wakatoi, or Pacific Arts Council. Is that still going? Yep. So there's those avenues as well. But the best thing to do is have a good look around the CNZ website and have a good chat to Kate about where you're at in your career, what the project is, because it may be that strategically it's better to go for one rather than the others, or she may say it's actually better at your stage of your career to go for creative communities first and then work your way up.
Yeah. These 2 books are your friends. I must admit, as I was settling into my new job and I had to read this over the summer holidays, I don't think that I necessarily believe that, but this is the Creative New Zealand Funding and Programs Guide, and you can download a copy from the website, or I'm more than happy to post you a copy, because there's not currently a Creative New Zealand office in Christchurch, but there will be soon. So yeah, in here there's a whole lot of information about funding deadlines for both the Quick Response Grant and the arts grants, anything to do with the types of projects that we can support and specific kinds of costs that we can support you with for certain things, lives in here. And then this little green visual arts book is another useful one to have a look through, again, downloadable from the website. My contact details are, interspersed, I think, in this one, maybe not through there. And it just talks in quite kind of clear ways about the types of visual arts activities that can be supported, either to do with developing and presenting work to audiences, developing skills sort of personally or with a group of people that you're working with, or projects with international connections or other kinds of things.
Yeah.
I didn't spend so much time reading this one over the summer holidays, so yeah. But the thing that you really need to become familiar with if you are interested in approaching Creative New Zealand are these 2 pages. It's to do with the outcomes and impacts that Creative New Zealand needs to see when we allocate support to projects. Obviously, when you come back at the end of the project and you do a completion report, you're singing the success, you're talking about any challenges that you met with, the things that you learnt, and the awesome times that were had. But when you go in for the funding itself, you have to come in under specific outcomes to do with participation in the arts, the production of high-quality New Zealand work, allowing audiences to experience high-quality work, or allowing New Zealand artists to gain success internationally. And there's a rather large asterisk there, so we can talk about projects if you want to go offshore. Yeah.
Are there any questions about the central government funding? Yes, Chloe.
Chloe. No. I reckon they should be too. So generally what happens, there's actually a template that you download the format from the website. This is something that in terms of the agreement that you sign, there are the deadlines that are outlined, but currently, and I know this is being recorded, so apologies to the grants and process team if I've got this wrong. Currently, I don't believe that it does actually outline the questions that will be asked. It's just a potentially two-page double-sided completion report, but it just asks for practical things about how did the budget actually work out. And obviously the thing to think about when you're filling out the completion report is that you get your original budget and you use the same format so that the person at the other end gets to compare apples with apples on each line of your budget just to see where the fluctuations were.
I'm currently reporting on a grant at the moment, and I think the main thing that you really need to think about is what you said in your application. So reread your application at the end, see what you said you were going to do, and then say whether or not you did it, and why or why not. That's kind of... You do have to do a report, but it's more anecdotal. There's no, you're not sent the completion report form to fill in with the emergency assistance grant. You just have to say what it achieved and again, the final budget.
Yeah, and again, according to the time frame for projects, obviously, if it's a long-term project, then there'll be ways in which you can kind of feed in information and make sure people are up to speed beforehand. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And June, and then the Japan is going to be coming up in February. Can you apply for 2 different sets of funds for that, or do you do it under one group?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really good to consider having that conversation with your advisor. I mean, I anticipate that because of what you're talking about, you're probably going to be talking to me rather than looking for a Creative Communities grant. And in that regard, it is really interesting to think about how an advisor can help you strategise about things like that. Obviously, in terms of the Creative New Zealand public funding that everyone's taxes goes into and then some of it ends up with us, there are certain things that we can fund and certain things we can't. So it may be that it's one project, but the majority of the investment is tagged to the New Zealand artists having the opportunity to travel to Japan, and that you show that there's income that comes in for the other side of it so that it can be seen as an exchange that's successful, but it doesn't actually request things that we wouldn't be able to give you anyway. Yeah. So yeah, we'll catch up, I guess.
Yeah.
I think we all learn by doing these projects, and if I heard the question right, is failure a legitimate outcome? I mean, it depends on your consideration of whether or not your project failed. I mean, if it didn't happen, that could be seen as a kind of negative outcome. But if it didn't happen for good reasons, and it might happen in future still, there's always a conversation that goes on around it. So, yeah, unless you want to extend, your definition of failure to kind of, we could talk about it some more. But, if you put on a show and nobody comes, the process of putting on the show could still be argued as a useful thing to have done. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of debate team strategy behind completion reports, I think.
Yeah.
Having filled out a lot in my time.
You can say that it was successful in terms of your own personal artist development, but it failed on audience development, something like that. There's ways of doing it. We're running out of time. TikTok, you don't stop. We wanted to talk about a few other things that I'm just going to breeze over. One is this website, which is all about funding.org.nz. FundView, Breakout, Corporate Citizens. These are all databases of people who have money to give, pretty much.
Yeah, this is a really interesting database, and Christchurch Public Library, yeah,
Yes.
thank you, actually subscribes to this database, series of databases. And so you're able to either access them by going into a library or access them online from home using the PIN number. I used to work for the library. PIN number that you should all have set up on your library cards. And I think that that's a really useful thing to know about, because there's actually this wealth of information that exists, not only in, those kinds of contexts. But each one of these, if we try to click through on any of them now, it'll say that we have to subscribe. And, don't pay for it, because you're paying for it in your rates already.
Yeah.
So in here, you'll see a list of a whole lot of different options that you could consider in terms of possible approaches to either fundraise or corporate citizens, is, I think, to do with obtaining
more sponsorship.
Yeah,
type.
like kind of industrial relationships, people who might have materials or things to give away to appropriate projects.
And you can narrow things down. You can look by region. You can say whether you're looking for as an individual or as part of a group, whether you're actually looking for a scholarship or you're looking for an award or a residency. There's all sorts of different things in there. So it's worth having a wee browse and having a look at that. The other thing we wanted to talk about a little bit was crowdfunding, which is quite a new thing that's happening now. This is pledgeme.co.nz, which has recently had its official launch in Christchurch. I've seen it used successfully and also not so successfully. The best example that I can think of is of a way where crowdfunding has worked for a New Zealander recently would be Taika Waititi, who crowdfunded the distribution money that they needed to take Boy to the States. And basically it's all or nothing funding, so you set a target and you set however many days that you want to succeed in your project. We'll go to that so you can have a wee look. Maybe. There we go. So they've set their target. You can see how many days are left for them to reach their target and how much they're up to. If they don't reach their target, they don't get any of the money. And it's almost a reward scheme for the people who are donating the funding. So you can see down here the rewards. So if you give these guys $5, you get a copy of their podcast. If you give them 25, you get a set of 8 postcards. So Taika, I think the first one was that he'd send you a thank you email, and it went all the way up to he would fly you to Gisborne to meet his aunties and you'd have a hangi, and that was like $15,000 or something. Other ones that he did, which could be applicable for visual arts projects, is he said for $50, I will send you a postcard from Boy and I'll draw a picture of what I think you look like on the back. So there's some cool ways of doing it. I've seen people who are wanting to record an album, for example, have used it as a kind of pre-order for the CD. So you pay $25 and you get a CD sent to you at the completion of the project. So it's something to think about. It is all or nothing, so you really have to push it out there. Personally, as someone who's donated on these sites, I like to know that if I don't give you the money, that the project's not going to happen. I want to see that it actually means something. I saw a show that was on a Bats recently who their time left, their deadline was 3 days before the show opened. So it was plainly obvious the show was still going to go ahead, just maybe with slightly worse costumes. So you want to see that it actually means something. And you can put videos up there
This is
pleading.
a really good one to watch at some stage if you're interested.
Yeah.
Whether or not you want to pledge them any money.
Yeah, so that's something to look at. The Arts Foundation is setting up an arts-specific one that launches in September this year, boosted.org.nz, and that's an interesting one to look at as well.
I think the thing about Boosted that's interesting is that because it does have that connection to the Arts Foundation, I think it's a fair expectation that there is that kind of sense of, not brand loyalty, but awareness of a lot of patrons for what the Arts Foundation kind of exists to do in terms of supporting practitioners. And as such, hopefully, it'll bring, the interest of that group to yourselves if you're interested in using this site. The other interesting thing about it, which is very useful for people who like to invest in, and help out projects, is that there is the opportunity for anything gifted through this system to be considered a charitable donation.
And that's why it's got that, the green, kind of, you can't quite see it in green, the point of difference in that for Boosted, you won't have to offer a reward. I'd suggest, I mean, my thoughts on this is that Boosted is going to be very much for those existing arts patrons or people who are already interested in the arts. I think Pledge Me will probably get you to a slightly wider audience. And with the reward thing, it can be used for a pre-order system or something like that.
Yeah. So just two interesting kind of outside the, funding matrix, but still about, gathering resources from elsewhere.
Yeah, new stuff. Pledge Me's already going, and Boosted starts, I think it's going to be live in September. Has anyone ever used it or used a crowdfunding? Yeah, it's quite huge in the States.
Yeah.
If you have a look at Kickstarter.com, for example, and Possible is one that they use in Australia. You can have a good idea, and you can see what works and what doesn't for people on those.
Yeah.
Any questions? Yes.
Really good question. For applications to Creative New Zealand or Creative Communities, you can definitely apply if you are a charitable trust, but you can also apply as an individual. If there's more than one person involved in the project, we have what's known in the grants process term as partner clients. And so that's just about making sure that the records are affiliated with everyone that's responsible for the project. But no, you don't have to go through the hurdles if you haven't got time to set yourself up as a charitable trust.
If you are applying as a group or as a, artist collective, it's probably a good idea to set up a joint account so that not one person can get to all the funds and steal them and go on holiday or spend them on something that nobody else, or as has happened to me, spend the money on something that wasn't in the budget and you didn't agree to, and so you're all left out of pocket because this one person could spend the money.
Yeah, that's
a word of caution.
Yeah, it's a really interesting just point to consider is that if it is a group project, there are some things that you can talk to your bank about to make sure that, the funding or the resources that you have sitting in there require 2 signatures to release any of them. I mean, that's back in the bad old days of checkbooks, so I'm sure there's some digital online login.
2 to authorise styles. Kiwi Bank is pretty good at helping with stuff like that, with the joint accounts. It's a bit like setting up a flat account, really. Any other questions? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yep, that's another really good question. Because of the contestable nature of the funding process, there's not any kind of specific guidelines in that regard in terms of career position. In terms of Creative New Zealand's priorities, the current for 2012 priorities, if you were applying to either the Quick Response Grant or the Arts Grant, priority is given to the creation and public presentation of high quality new work or creative and professional development and residency opportunities for individual artists and practitioners. So in principle, what those priorities seek to do is when everything comes in the round, and it could be all sorts of different kinds of projects needing a little or a lot of support, these priorities help us kind of, pull some things further up the list when we're looking at all of the awesome projects that come in, and then we look at what we've got to kind of give them in terms of financial resources. So sometimes paying attention to priorities or talking with your advisor about, really good ways to try to, advantage your request is really, a good way to strategise.
It's a little bit like a job application. I think that's quite a good way of thinking about it. You don't actually know who else is applying, but if you can answer all the specifications and priorities, then you're standing a really good chance.
Yeah, I mean, again, it just depends in terms of the agreement that you have. If you secure some support, like if we're completely funding or putting a large proportion towards the catalogue, yeah, there are some expectations just about, often actually at the moment it's not the logo, it's just a text credit. So, that's something that you can certainly get in touch with an advisor and just clarify to make sure that you've, ticked the box. You can also talk to them about the distribution of material to do, catalogues, for example. It may be that, 5 good people could be added to your plan for distribution that could actually end up paying dividends in future. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways you can kind of open up those opportunities.
We probably have to wrap it up now, but we'll be around if you have any more questions. And feel free to get in touch with either of us, although I think Kate's probably slightly more useful.
At least I'll try to be.
Yeah. So thank you.